Hello, and welcome to today's NCA webcast, Guarding the Gates, Structured Admissions as Good Governance. We're glad you've decided to join us today. My name is John Good, National Club Association's Director of Events, Technology, and Member Engagement, and I'll be producing today's event. As always, a few housekeeping items before we begin. Today's webcast is being recorded, and as a registrant, you'll receive access to the recording. Look for an email with information on accessing the video recording and download of the presentation materials within 24 hours of the webcast's end. You can also access this and all NCA webcasts at NCA's education portal, and that web address is nationalclub.org/education. We will address questions at the end of today's presentation, but you can submit your questions at any time. Now, in order to ask a question, click on that Q&A tab down there in your Zoom control panel and type your question. You can turn on closed captioning for today's webcast by selecting the closed caption button in your Zoom control panel. Please note that closed captions are auto-generated, so kindly excuse any translation or typographical errors. And finally, as is true with any web technology, this webcast is only as good as your internet connection. If you do have any technical difficulties, your best bet is to refresh your stream or close all your browsers and log back into the webcast the same way you did the first time. And now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Today we're joined by Dan Denehy, CCM, CHA, President of Denehy Club Thinking Partners. Robert C. James, CCM, CCE, CHE, Vice President with Denehy Club Thinking Partners, Matthew Allnatt, General Manager with the Jonathan Club, and CJ Joe Bendy, Chief Operating Officer with River Oaks Country Club. Gentlemen, if you're ready to begin, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thank you, John. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to roll through some really critical membership admissions processes, and we're going to apply some best practices. We're going to tell you about what's working, what's not working. We're going to give you some case studies around epic governance failures and a couple good ones too, which will reaffirm good best practices. So we almost titled this Guardians of the Galaxy because that's what a lot of you do, but it's an interesting dynamic between the management's responsibility and governance responsibility in this very special area where the predominance of the responsibility relies on the board and the membership committee, but the responsibility each of you have, assuming most of our attendees are club managers, is to embed a good structured process in the discipline of that process. So again, thanks for joining us. Just to start off, I would say our industry has not wasted a good pandemic, right? Since COVID, membership has been gangbusters. 50% of all clubs in a recent survey from McMahon have wait lists range anywhere from 3 to 30 years, believe it or not. Who's going to wait 30 years? I'm not sure. But the wait lists are incredibly robust, yet half of the respondents are still in need of members. So a robust admissions process needs to be embedded based on your needs. So as a firm, we do consulting work, we always start with 3 questions around membership. How many members do you need, over what period of time, and what can they pay? And when you solve for that, you can build your process around that. So anyway, we'll get to all this, and we're going to leverage the experience and knowledge that both Joe and Matthew have accumulated over their 100 years of club management experience. But briefly about the firm, some of you may know the firm quite well, I hope so, but we're trending on almost 2,000 consulting and search projects over 25 years, over 800 clients. That should tell you that we're doing about two and a half projects for every client that we're blessed to be engaged with. We've got a team of 12 people spread around the country. So at any one time, we're quite busy and got mostly lots of consulting stuff going that is not visible on the website, but certainly is ongoing. But please visit our website to see the search opportunities and the governance stuff. So today, our objectives, we're going to focus on this survey that we did. About 180 respondents were kind enough to respond. We're going to quote some of their responses in narrative form. what good governance looks like in terms of membership processes, how you can build a process. And at the end, certainly we're happy to share the deck, which will give you a pragmatic approach to how you can build a customized membership process for your club. So moving that along, Bob, I'm going to ask Bob James to my right to start with some objectives of our day.
Thanks, Dan, and thank you all for being with us. As you've now seen, we had about 180 responses. So we had put the survey out. Denehy had put it out last June, I believe it was, and then we published an article in Club Director Guarding the Gates, which summarized some of the results of that survey, but there's a lot more and deeper information that we have. And so that was the motivation for us to sort of put this together for you now, is just to give you a sense of what's deeper and what we can talk about in the future. And so as Dan mentioned, there was 180 people that responded, and that was a very diverse group from all sizes of clubs, all types of clubs, and from all parts of the country. So we were really pleased that the information, you can really look at it and say, does this apply to me? And feel that maybe it does, because it isn't just an isolated group that you can say, well, that's this person or that person. And so the focus that this survey really was about background checks. We really wanted to emphasize that. We wanted to talk about the difference between vetting and background checks. And so this is, the broader term is screening. And so screening members, we want to know who is going beyond the vetting process, which is sort of the holistic part, where that's the cultural side. And that's where you're, the interviews and letters of recommendation and things, and then getting back into, the background stuff. And so talking about, the sponsors' dynamics. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit as we go along. And then the whole process and how it should be laid out and what you might think about in terms of what your club might do. So the first slide that we had is, do clubs conduct background checks? And so as you can see, a surprising number, at least it was somewhat surprising to me, that only 46% said, yes, we do. And then there's some uncertainties that we do that. But I guess that's a fairly large number, but we have to sort of segregate it out a little bit and say to what degree, and we'll get to that along the line. And so there were 45% that said really they don't do background checks, and that's a question. When they say that, do they mean that they don't do any form of background checks? Because I think there's a number of clubs that at least go and find criminal records, and things are public knowledge and public record. So we'll discern a little bit of that along the way as well. And so move it to the next slide here. So who gets checked? There's interesting results from this, because this is of the 45 or 49 clubs that do it either on a regular or irregular basis. But of course, we all know that you're going to do, if you're doing background checks, you're going to do it on the member themselves. And most of the time, if you're going to do it, some of the people said they never do it, and so I guess they're depending upon vetting alone. When we look at who is the number of members that do it just for the member spouse, or will do it for the member spouse, that number drops down, and that's an interesting number. That it's 60% do it for spouses, but why not more? Because we're talking for the most about family memberships, and so we've got the member themselves, their spouse, and then we've got their children. And as we move across, our columns there, you see that for the most part, most people are saying they're not doing it for adults, and these are young adults. But the question would be, those young adults, as what age are they? They have a history for themselves. They've got potentially DWIs. There's a number of things that they may have a bad record for behavior, and just assuming that because your parents are in the club and we're not going to do any kind of vetting on them, that's not necessarily a good plan for making sure that you control your membership per se. So the next one elements included in the background check. And so these were the elements, for the most part, that the people in the survey provided us. And so criminal convictions, you see that seems to be the number one thing that clubs are concerned about if they're going out and doing deeper background checks. And, that can be everything from multiple DWIs to felonies, to any number of things that you want to look for. And so these are the non-starters, as we'll get on later on, for the most part in most clubs. If they find out bad information in that case, then the candidate's not going to move forward very far. So the financial risk check, so we're looking for bankruptcy, we're looking for late payments, we're looking for people that maybe appear to have the money, but can they afford and will they pay the bill? And will they be current on their checks? And will they support capital assessments, things of that nature? Reference checks, that speaks for itself. Civil and civil suits and activities. And so are they a subject of a civil suit, or are they themselves created or caused some civil suits? And it's not the type of person you're necessarily going to want to bring into your membership, but it's out there. And as we'll see later, it's surprising how many times these things come up. So employment verification's always good to know, because you want to know that they're likely to be there and being paid and be able to support themselves and their family going forward. Educational background, we want to know for the most part that they're trustworthy, what they are who they say they are. And so picking up all these little nuances along the way will give you insight as to what kind of a member they might be. And so open source, the clubs that don't do a lot of background checking with a third party do a lot of this by themselves. And so they'll Google. And so I just, for an example, today went online and I Googled myself. So my name is Robert Clayton James. And so you need a full name to do that. And so you'd probably like to know that James Robert Clayton is a former police officer in Texas, was convicted in 2009 for receiving child pornography. He was sentenced to 10 years. And that came up in social media. Now, you could see how somebody might confuse us a little bit. And that would be a very sad situation if one of your rogue committee people make that mistake and suddenly, it's all around the club, around the committee. And so Google and the social media may not be all that it's cut out to be, unless you've got a third-party company that's doing it and fact checks and make sure that information is bona fide. So I think, Dan, you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'll make a couple comments on this particular slide, though. Okay. There is, I'll say, a trend for clubs that do background checks to look for civil suit activity. Clubs in our neck of the woods here in Fairfield County, several have said to us, we don't want a potential member or a member that solves their problems with their neighbors with a civil suit, right? So to Bob's point, if they're involved in one or they initiate one, that's an indicator of character, as is education verification. If they said they went to the Harvard Business School and that wasn't true, that goes to character as well. But a couple of quick points there. In terms of the sponsor concerns, that's what we're talking about now. Here we go. Sponsors did voice a concern initially, or in some cases, across the bell curve, and Matthew and Joe represent, the top decile of wonderful clubs in America. But in some cases, sponsors were a bit miffed that the club was going to do a background check. That would concern, or did concern, a lot of the respondents by saying, gee, if they're concerned about it, what's going to get discovered? And so that was very interesting to us. Again, 85% of the respondents sponsor voice reluctance. Boy, that was amazing. None. I mean, 85 aren't concerned, but a good portion are concerned. So what's that really tell you? Next, what do background checks reveal? Identifying, I don't want to read all these slides for you. And again, they're all going to be available, but big elements to me were elements like sponsor withdrew the application from consideration after learning that the background check was going to occur. The fact that that background checks surfaced issues that the sponsor was not aware of. So there's a slide in here somewhere, Bob, that says the sponsor is an advocate, right? And so just like when you're screening talent to join your management team, you've got to have a good skeptical eye when you're considering these people. Socially, by and large, they're going to be fine, but there's stuff under the surface that you've got to protect the membership about, and it's a fiduciary responsibility of your board, even bigger.
Yeah, I might also add, Dan, I think those are scary numbers, because we're talking, okay, half the people do background checks, and of those, this group, a third of them had people withdraw because there was a background check.
Yeah.
And so what does that say for the rest of clubs that don't do that? I think it speaks a lot to the clubs that just do vetting without background checks. Could a third of them have pulled themselves out if in fact they knew there was going to be some background check? So big numbers, scary numbers to some degree, right?
And Joe will talk about it in a minute or two, Joe, about just how your club effectively trains the sponsor on how to be a sponsor. We'll circle back to that, but I was fascinated by that in our prep conversation. So trying to keep this moving, the future of background checks, there is a hard trend line that clubs are going to be adopting background checks more frequently or as a consistent element of process, and they're much easier to get today. You can get a high-level background check pretty easily, but a real good background check is done by a third party, and the member or the candidate would sign a release where online they would disclose their social security number, and that just gets to a much deeper level of background checks that, by and large, people can't get to just quote Googling people. So this is a fundamental in terms of it is a benchmark, right? It can't be debated. You can debate character or style or if they're a good guy or not, but if there are certain standards that your club uses, criminal conviction, number of DWIs, whatever those standards are, that's a legal protection in and of itself. Bobby, we're on governance takeaways.
Yes, we are, and we'd just like to add that we're in a litigious society, and that's why more and more clubs are finding it necessary to dig deep and find out what people are doing. So, and this governance takeaway from the survey. So, clubs believe that their admissions process works, yet acknowledge inconsistencies. So that was sort of comments across the board, whether you're doing a thorough background check or just a vetting. And so I think if you look to your own situation, this is, how does your club, how do you feel about your admissions process? Is it adequate? Is it what it should be? And so we want to lead you a little bit into maybe what it should be. Documentation practices are often minimal. When I've talked with a number of people that filled out the survey, when we talked about process, they said, well, our process is secret. And so it's like, secret to whom? Secret to everybody. And it went to the extent of a lot of, I guess it's fairly common that some clubs won't divulge who's on the admissions committee because they want to protect them from untold pressure by fellow members. But in some of these cases, who's on the committee, how big the committee is, who's chairman of the committee, is there a process, what is the process and how it's done? And in a lot of these cases, what they're suggesting is that's a secret, and that's a secret even to the board. And if that's the case in your club, that's a really dangerous situation. And we'll talk about that in particular as we move forward, about how you have to structure these processes, and you've got to document things. But if you've got just a random group of people in, as well-meaning as they have, and they're making reference calls and they're interviewing people and stuff, and you don't have a script for them and a process that's clearly defined and approved by the board and approved by legal counsel, you can get yourself into a lot of problems. So I think they can read the rest of that particular slide. So
quick point, everybody. When we were prepping for this session today, We think that relying on the survey data is mission critical. We're going to try to point out what the governance responsibilities are, and to some degree yours, but it's pretty much an 80-20 rule in that regard, where the burden of who's going to be a good member relies on the membership committee and the board, and your job can be, or arguably should be, instituting a solid process in which they can live. So here we go.
Okay. So at this point, I'd like to bring in Joe Bendy and Matthew Allnatt. I think they're well known to you all, but for those that don't, there's a brief introduction. I'd just like to say that they're from two very well-known clubs, large clubs, and diverse in so many different ways. And you'll see as we talk about their screening process that they have a completely different approach to things, and it appears to work well for them, given the culture of their club, given the nature of their communities, given to the nature of the growth that they're trying to seek in the club, and so. Maybe what we'll do is start off with Matthew, if you don't mind. You want to talk a little bit about your club, and I know you've been there 17 years, and you got over 1,000 members, and tell us a little bit about your processes, if you would.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Like I think you mentioned, I mean, we are a large club. We have 4,000 members. We take in close to 200 members a year. So obviously our process is critical in that it's streamlined without in any way taking shortcuts as to letting people in and doing our due diligence. So we have, since I had started here, we've done background checks, but those background checks have grown. I believe 17 years ago, social media wasn't, for instance, as important, but it certainly is today. So it's something that, as I said, is included: criminal background checks, etc. So our process is similar probably to many clubs. We have two different memberships. One is what we call a full membership or resident membership, which requires 2 sponsors and 6 references. And the process takes anywhere between 6 to 9 months if everything goes, everything is returned as is needed. One of it, again, something that's different, I guess, a little bit with us is we do everything electronically. We don't do that because of speed. We do that because of convenience and relevance for our members. I know many clubs still require handwritten notes and blood from the third born child to be presented and things like that. We kind of have gone away from that. It's just, our clubs is not right next door to people. People are busy, so we do it all electronically. For our town membership, which is more kind of similar to a city membership, we have a town preview membership, which starts almost right away for someone coming in. They have to have 2 sponsors and a reference. We also provide a shepherding program, so the requirement to have known that candidate is shorter than, say, for a resident member, where it's at least you have to have known them for 3 years and socially. So that's it. I don't know if I've missed anything. That's kind of the big picture. As you can tell, I'm a massive proponent of background checks. I think in today's society of blame, as I call it, you need to help your volunteers, which is really what your membership committee and board is, and protect them in any way you can. And so to me, it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's people are used to it when they apply for a mortgage or anything. So yeah, if someone does have a problem with it, there's going to be something you find.
Matthew, one quick question. The process, you said it's electronic. What's that mean? Is there an application or a database that you can use that is ubiquitous in the club industry, or did you customize it for your own needs?
We customized it for our own needs. It's very unique. And for $25,000, you too can have a copy of our I'm just kidding. It is, it's something we customize ourselves. It's not something, it's changed over time as we've kind of we obviously have our lawyers check it out. We obviously, there are security issues. So, and like I said, it's proved to be wonderful for us. And like I said, when I did come here, it was handwritten, but the amount of complaints we'd get, the delays, and that's where we had the most delays in people coming through the process. Was there's this kind of little booklet somewhere in the universe being passed around for people to write in their notes, many of which were illegible.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
That's good.
as I recollect, you use a couple different vendors, right, for different purposes, and not necessarily looking for their names as much as did I glean that correctly?
Yes, we do one that's very, very thorough, but on occasion we have to go a little bit deeper. So we have a secondary background check, and sometimes you get these kind of these comments that come back through the judicial system that really don't mean anything. So, well, what does that mean? And so we will try and dig a bit deeper and get the actual information on what the case is. There's certain words for things, that people use. And so we have, let's just say, a way of getting more information that's sometimes not readily available to other background checks.
How about social media scans? Do you outsource that?
No, it's all done by the same people.
Okay. So, but they are doing the social media.
Oh my goodness. It's more important. That's probably one of the most important things. Credit checks and things. But I will tell you, the other thing that's surprising is people they embellish their education as well. You say why, and I mean, I don't know, egos are egos, but we're looking for signals, and something like that tells you something. So we would then approach them and say, well, not us, but their sponsor.
Yeah. So I remember as we were getting off a call that you and I had, and you mentioned that why do you do it? And you said, well, we do it for employees. Why wouldn't we do it for our members? And so I think that's a good quote that we can use somehow. So thanks, Matthew. And we've got a few questions that we'll get to you along the way, but let's talk with Joe now a little bit, because again, his process is entirely different, and he's got a big country club, 1,600 plus members or so, and an entirely different kind of approach to this, and also a tenured manager with, I guess, 24 years. Is that how long you've been there, Joe?
It's getting close to that, just short.
Okay. Well, I was talking to your president about the opportunity, so
I'd go with what he said then.
Good answer, Joe.
So, Joe, can you tell us a little bit about your processes?
Absolutely. So we actually still use some paper at the club, although we do have a system that we keep all the information in. So our process is probably not too different than others. We require two members to be sponsors of the candidate. We don't have an application. Now, this may be semantics, but it's important to us. We have a proposal form. We have candidates, not applicants. Those two sponsors of the candidate have to complete the form. The candidate sign off on information regarding background check specifically. And that's one of the first things we do is we'll run a background check. We post the names of all candidates on the bulletin board here at the club for existing members to solicit feedback from them, letters of support if they're so inclined. And as importantly, if there's an issue within that circle, to make us aware of any issues they may have with that individual candidate. You'd asked a moment ago, or mentioned a moment ago, about the sponsors' education. Our membership director runs, I'll say, an educational class for anyone that has not sponsored a member before, to make sure they fully understand the requirements of the sponsors. Our process is very sponsor-driven. The candidate does not engage with the club except through the sponsors. Each sponsor must take the candidate and their spouse, if married, and meet with every director at the club. We turn over 4 new directors every year. So it's a multi-year process. Our average time, probably from the proposal being submitted to an invitation to join, assuming they are extended invitation to join, is about 3 years. Excuse me. We do run a background check when the proposal first comes in, and then we will run it again prior to extending an invitation. Given the length of time, we want to make sure that nothing else has transpired since then. We do require, again, as I stated, the candidate and their spouse to meet with all of the directors. The sponsors are there as well. And it's important that, we admit one person as the member, but if they're married, we want to make sure that the spouse, is engaged in that process. Obviously, they're going to be here at the club frequently. So we want to make sure that both of those individuals are engaging with our board. Once they begin meeting with members of our board, we do have a membership committee. And while technically it used to be secret, everyone knows who is on it. It is made up of members of our board and chaired by our immediate past president. They meet on a regular basis and talk about the candidates. They solicit feedback through a very specific system from our board members that have met to kind of see where the support lies within the board. We require all candidates, along with their sponsors and their spouse, to attend a cocktail reception with the board in a social setting with their spouses. As one director said, both the member of the board and their spouse may have different observations and interaction with the candidates. So getting a different perspective is always helpful. And once they get through that entire process, assuming they checked all the boxes, so to speak, eventually they'll be invited to join the club.
And do you fast track your legacies at all?
So I'd say that they have a bit of a leg up, but they go through the exact same process as any other candidate would go through. They still have to meet every single member of the board. A board member may have known them for, since they were a child, but they still go through the exact same process.
So do you really find that it's a small number, only 8 per year that you're really bringing in? Do you find every once in a while a withdrawal where things don't, for whatever reason, or is that really just not likely to happen in your society and your culture?
Well, it's interesting. Of all the candidates on the list, the cream kind of rises to the top. So all the candidates may be good candidates, but some are probably better than others. On occasion, if a candidate doesn't get traction, the sponsors may elect not to continue the process. If something comes up during the process that is really detrimental to their candidate, more often than not, the sponsors will be informed that the likelihood of that candidate making it through the process is very, very slim. They may withdraw. We have a time limit on our proposals. It's 3 years. At the end of that 3 years, if the candidate's not been invited to join, they can resubmit a proposal for another 3-year period. And if at the end of that period they've still not been invited to join, then there's an automatic kind of timeout. Gives the sponsor actually an opportunity to say, look, maybe we should try something different, or maybe this isn't going to happen. But on occasion, sure, people may be given the message that there's some resistance to that candidate, and maybe they should reconsider.
Good. Well, thank you. And you too, I hope you stand by, because we'll have some other things we'd like to just get your impression on. But a comment from yours, which I thought was very telling too, is you said it's really hard to get in the club, but it's even harder to get one out. And
is that Joe? Joe said that?
Yeah.
It's good.
And so I think that speaks.
The other thing I would add, just from a membership process, we're a big city. We have people moving in all the time. And quite often you might have someone new to the city of Houston that, comes in with some fanfare and is very well thought of. And, maybe they're running a big organization or a big company or something. And there can often be, I'll say, a lot of attention on that bright, shiny new penny. We tend to let it gain a little luster as a club before any action on any kind of one new to the city. And I'll just say that's proven to be a beneficial approach.
Yeah, well, thank you. And so we've now given you, 2 really good examples of how the system works, and it's working well. But we wanted to throw in a few case studies that we've come across to give everybody an idea of what can go wrong and maybe what to look out for. And so, Dan, I think you've got a case that you want to talk about.
We've got a couple, everyone, and for different reasons. We're not going to disclose the names of the club, but this is public record, and by and large, you might know some of these clubs. Several are really high quality clubs that you would think are bulletproof, but clearly not. But what happens here is governance breakdown or the lack of structure. I'm not going to read through all these necessarily, but if you don't have a disciplined structure where it has a solid quantitative element to it, not only qualitative, that's where lawsuits occur. And it'll suck the time out of you, notwithstanding you're a paid employee, but it really demoralizes the board and really has a dampening effect in the culture of the organization. So we'll give you some real examples here. Where they get it wrong, and there was sort of some dancing around this, not by purpose, but sponsors are advocates, right? They want to get their next door neighbor in. God forbid their office mate necessarily. Usually, or many clubs don't like or look down on a business relationship because there could be some motivation that isn't simply social there. But the over reliance on a sponsor, they advocate, they don't vet. They don't see everything that these processes will uncover. Inconsistency is where there's exposure legally. So if you don't apply the process consistently to all applicants, there can be a system failure there, and we'll give you a good lawsuit example there. Documentation, we'll give you some examples of what should be documented and what need not be documented, right? And so Bob will cover that, I believe, in a subsequent slide. But we had one instance here, which we'll get to, board overriding without structure. We're going to tell you about a club president that wanted to get the person in and just said, no, he's getting in. And it was really bad. So here's initial case study. This is a club that is in the greater New York area. It's on every list. I'll say it that way. But it was a defamation lawsuit. A proposed member claimed existing members using the admissions process to pressure him for business activity. He refused. Letter circulated to the admissions committee that he was a bad guy. They claimed unethical behavior. It bared out that it wasn't true. It escalated to the New York Supreme Court. The club prevailed predominantly because of qualified privilege. And qualified privilege, I had to look that up, but qualified privilege is that the communication internally was made in good faith, that there was legitimate interest or duty to communicate the information. The communication was limited to only those that were legitimately needing to know, i.e. the membership committee and the executive committee of the board. And there was no actual malice. The rejected applicant could not prove malice, could not prove that that these fellows didn't want him in because of a business relationship. There was about $300,000 of legal fees over and above the D&O. So we can go on about D&O, but one thing that you really have to look for in this space is a prior acts exclusion. So a new GM, I can regale you with stories, but a new GM gets a job. He gets sued along with the board as a new GM for something that happened before, but there was a prior acts exclusion in the D&O, and they wouldn't cover it, and he was unaware of it. So there's some subtleties here that aren't subtle much anymore. So this sort of stuff can really escalate. I would say, very importantly, the lessons learned here in this particular case, how structured admissions processes can really help. Enforcing clear confidentiality rules, establishing procedures to verify and respond to objection letters. Again, the discipline of this process is effectively similar to the discipline process we apply in good search work. So we'll give you another one. This one is a case study of culture damage, and the governance system didn't have an excellent process baked into the admissions process. So the admissions committee unanimously declined a high-profile applicant after references raised behavioral concerns. The board president, who I won't name him, but I know him, who personally knew the applicant, overrode the committee's decision. How do you think that made the committee and the board feel? And admitted the member unilaterally. Within 18 months, well documented, the member was involved in multiple conduct complaints involving staff. Lots of system failures there. Epic lawsuit again. Lots of board members resigned. This could have easily been avoided. No surprise, the president resigns, but he got into another club. So what were the lessons here? Boy, again, not going to read through all of those, but defining a clear process. When somebody's rejected, what's the alternative? Is there a recompense for that if possible? But the governance structure really matters. And the takeaway, which again, if you do a little research, you can find this online, that it had a really replicating negative impact amongst the community in which the club resides and the community of club membership. Bob?
Yeah. So this next case, this case is somewhat of a landmark case, and many of you may recall it. It was in the courts and in the public from, I think it's 1999 through 2001 or 2003. And so it was a discrimination case, but the issue here was about documentation failure. And so what this is about is 9 members, female members of a club in the Boston suburb area, sued the club because they felt they were being discriminated against. They felt that they didn't have access to the 19th tee. They felt that they didn't get preferential tee times. They felt that women that could join the club on their own were put second in line to membership. And they had a host of other little concerns, which I guess they may have originally tried to work out with the club. And I don't know that for a fact, but would assume, but made no effort or made no progress and ended up suing the club. Now, the result of this is that actually these 9 women were awarded $1.97 million by a jury in 2003. So as we're all thinking about it, is wait a second, this is a private club. It's a private club. And so what they do isn't that protected? And should the courts even have handled this? Should they have said, whatever you do because you're private, you can run your own. But the reality is that in certain types of gender discrimination and things like that, they dig deeper. And so this whole case ended up relying or being founded on the basis that they really didn't have a process to document any of their processes. And so they couldn't say, the club could not defend itself and sort of say, hey, we don't discriminate. This is our process. This is our wait list. This is the records that we keep. Here are the records of discussion. This is why we didn't, provide them certain rights or privileges or any kind of documentation. And in the end, and that's what's really scary about this thing. And so it said, as a part of the resulting consent decree, the club was required to implement a new admissions tracking system under regulatory oversight and publicly report admissions activities going forward. So they actually had to, and maybe they're still doing that, had to now report to a representative of the court how their process is going and open it up. And as we talked about it before, this is a dichotomy a little bit because we're saying, hey, you got to document things, and yet we want to keep them private and confidential. And as we'll say later on, it's private and confidential. It's got to be truthful, and we've got to sort out people's feelings and conjecture. And that's the only way that you're going to protect yourself. Yet, keeping things in good order. That if you should be sued, and you can always be sued, that you have a chance of surviving. So.
This club went from a solid B+ reputation in the market to a C. Absolutely. And the fact that the process is open may or may not be right for that club, but it dampened the brand veneer in the marketplace. So here we go. This is a good one. This is a story of where the system worked. Discovered a felony conviction. Person was rejected through the good process. The process was tested, pressure tested in court. Ironically, 6 months later, that it substantiated that the process was well functioning or high functioning, and 6 months later, the individual that was rejected was indicted for investment fraud. So great case of where it worked. And maybe that's a win, right? It's maybe an argument for club managers, club management to put in, time-tested, pressure-tested good processes. And I'm really happy that Joe and Matthew are with us today, because you can tell these are incredibly high-functioning, top decile clubs, but the process is a little different at each club, and it fits their culture. So you've got to engineer a process that fits your culture. And it really goes back to those questions I started with at the beginning of our session. How many members do you need, over what period of time, and at what price point? And that'll drive the scrutiny in the process, the standards in the process, and the velocity with which you can move the process. So here we go. Real cost of admissions failures, right? And so I've cited a couple times the legal cost around this stuff. These costs are in excess of the D&O and the umbrella. So these costs are really material. But think about how club managers and boards deploy their time. These are immense time sucks. They just suck the oxygen out of the room and all the good direction and strategic planning and good work that people do, because it's an epic annoyance where, by and large, your board's not getting paid for this stuff. So it really, really dampens the culture. So that's one piece. The culture damage, as I alluded to, years of conflict, and it frequently can trickle down into the management team. Blame goes deep in terms of the board, and they don't want to blame their buddies, right? So frequently management gets blamed. But I would say the operational impact is demoralizing, even for line staff, even for golf pros. When they go to a golf event and this stuff is going on, a well-documented lawsuit that's in the news, it's no fun for them as they're representing the club. So let's get to how we structure this stuff. Structured admissions processes protects the club's culture, reputation, and we should have added some legal stuff here too. So I'm really keen on reputation can be damaged by only one bad hire, I almost said, and one bad apple in your membership, right? It just dampens the tone and the culture of the organization. A structured admissions process is the board's first line of culture and risk protection. This is a growing theme. I almost said subtext. This is a really growing theme that you as custodians of culture need to really embed. So Joe, I think, has a probation period. Maybe it was Matthew, but one of these fellows mentioned what I think is a best practice, a 3-year probation period to vet these people, even once they've gotten. Is that you, Joe? Am I doing that from memory?
No, it is not. It must be Matthew, but I will add that if you're admitted here as a junior member, our junior membership goes up to the age of 40. At the time, usually it's about 3 to 6 months before you turn 40. You have to go through almost another admissions process, before you're extended an invitation to be an active member. So based on how you've behaved during those first years is taken into consideration. It's very rare that someone behaves poorly enough to not be admitted, but it is another opportunity to consider those candidates before you give them a full active / voting membership at the club.
Got it. So a couple best practices, and we'll get more specific, and again, try to manage our good time here. Sponsors must be a good, and this is from the survey and just from best practices that we've seen along our consulting labs. Sponsors must be a member in good standing for a certain period of time, and pick the number. 2 sponsors of members are typically required. Many supporting letters. Sponsors can't be board members, can't be family members, can't be buddies from work. A club I managed in Greenwich for many years, we had a residency required. You had to live in Greenwich for a certain period of time. Golf clubs that we can name around the country might have a handicap requirement. Those of us that have played in Europe, many clubs you can't get on unless you have a certain handicap. So these are kind of very direct quantitative elements that can exclude people for good reason. And these are clear best practices amongst the best clubs in the country. So objective number 4, we're going to take you through 5 key elements of that any club can embed and make their own in terms of processes. And so we'll start with culture compatibility. The culture fit is mission critical, right? Are they going to be buddies for everyone else, not just the husband or wife, but husband and wife, presuming they're married, and their children? Are they good culture fits? You can see or scan for these elements in here: reputation, history, tenure, other not-for-profit volunteerism, usage and fit. Some people, we have some clients that say, we're looking for people that are going to join, pay full dues, and not use the place very much, right? Or if they have too many kids, boy, that's going to clog up our junior programming. Or if their kids are out of school. So those are quantitative elements too that can be used during the screening process based on your individual club's need and culture, and certainly sourcing, staff and membership insights. We're involved with some clubs out west, Shooting Star and Yellowstone, and some really cool places. And they rely a lot on the manager and director of membership calling pros, calling managers to see how staff integrates, or how the potential member integrates with staff. Are they kind? Are they deferential? That kind of thing. So those are things that are easily sourced by good management teams, but are really critical. Next are references. And as we pointed out, sponsors are advocates, right? So references are really, really important. Just like when you're screening management talent to join your team, you should start with a script. You want to use legal guardrails. You want to be specific on what you're asking. You can't ask certain stuff, and that should pass legal muster in your state. There's certain states that are much more onerous on that standard. California is one, Massachusetts, New York, to just name three. Other states not so, but there are explicit standards on screening that some states have in place. So you want to make sure that you are consistent with those standards. Having a script, again, to ask references specific things, knowing how to do references, the long pause, good listening, probing questions, not shaping answers. These are really, really mission critical things. And again, GM to GM or pro to pro or GM to pro kind of background work is really insightful, because candidates are always on their best behavior with their pals or neighbors. Are they on their best behavior with staff? So background checks, we've talked about that, but Bob's going to cover a few pieces here.
And I think that, there's some really important elements to it. One being, and that's aside from this sheet, your process by which you're getting permission to do background checks. And so we asked that question on our survey, where is it written? Does the sponsor know that they're going to ask the candidate for permission to do background checks? Is it written in documents? And does the candidate clearly understand when he's filling out the paperwork that they're giving permission to do background checks? And so we're talking for the most part of, again, third-party background checks, which will also do the public records side of it, but they're going to dig deeper, as we've said earlier. And so the process is independent of the reference checks, although reference phone calls and checks often, besides being done by the committee people, there are outside services that will do that. And oftentimes that's a good idea to protect yourself, because they'll do it on a structured basis. You'll get a report that is from a third party rather than somebody analyzing the results of what they said. And so all this leads to putting a formality to it, of which, there was concern by many of the clubs that we don't want to get into this because the formality is just not our culture. But we're trying to really emphasize the fact that the formality is so important to protect the culture. And later on, we'll talk about how people feel about the future of it. And so the criminal and civil history. So we've already talked about that, civil litigation and stuff. The social media and public records records reviews, and so going into public records and doing media scans. Not too long ago, there was a study by college admissions officers, and 36% of them say that colleges are now doing social media scans as one of their admissions processes. And so, this is getting to be, pretty much accepted throughout all different industries, and certainly hiring people these days. We're always cautious about telling our kids, right? Don't be careful what you have online if you're trying to apply for a job. So it gets used all over the place, and we need to be aware of it. And so financial indicators, again, the bankruptcy and credit checks and things of that nature to make sure that the person's going to be able, the family's going to be able to afford the club and use it regularly if that's the case. And then, as you see, education and employment verification. Again, sorry, I won't belabor that point because Dan wants to get into sponsor accountability.
So one point I will make about social media checks, and we do this in the firm in terms of executive search. Social media checks scan the internet for blogs, video blogs, comments, and it could be comments that are racist, that have a certain particular bias. We use a platform that scrubs the internet and goes into sites that are password protected, and people can put stuff out there that is just crazy. If it is crazy, the company escalates it to us, and we then pass it along for the hiring authority to make a judgment on. But it's much more aggressive. I almost used the word insidious, but there's a lot of stuff out there that you might not be able to find just by Googling somebody's name. So
yeah, and we've talked with companies that do facial recognition and things, and so you don't have to be already tagged. They can pick up somebody in somebody else's Facebook page or whatever, and so they can really go deep and a lot deeper than typically clubs have the software and the knowledge to go.
Yep. So sponsor accountability. If you've got a loosey-goosey process, they're not going to take it seriously. Sponsor represents the personal endorsement, as we've talked about before, but there has to be clear standards, as Joe described, in terms of what their responsibility is. Coaching sponsors towards complying with the process, handling bias or incomplete submissions. I love the fact that at Matthews Club, if it's not complete, it's not moving forward, right? It's kind of like a mortgage application, I would think, or completing your taxes online kind of deal. You're not going to go to the next page if you don't have that documentation in place. I think that really puts the onus on the sponsor in a really good way. Handling bias or incomplete submissions too. Maybe it's not the right sponsor. It could be a really terrific candidate. Is that the right sponsor? And conversely, could be a really good sponsor that just doesn't know enough about the knucklehead he or she could be sponsoring at the time. So that's a really subtle, important nuance to that process. Documentation discipline. Boy, we don't want to wear this out because we've talked a lot about it, but there's a legal standard here, everyone, that clubs have to comply with that gets pressure tested a lot more these days. And it allows you, the board, you, the club, you, the admissions committee, to say, you know what, Dan's not the right fit right now. Let him take a pass. Let him apply in 3 years from now. But that documentation discipline really puts rigor and structure around both acceptance and denial. And so it's like getting into an Ivy League, right? Once you get in, it's amazing. But if you get into a lesser college, it was a layup, right? So the fact that you can get into River Oaks is an immense accomplishment based on how Joe's process works as an example. So,
and I think it's an important fact on the first line of this before we go off of it, and that's that the information should be verified facts, not opinions, and so we keep dwelling on that opinions should not be brought into the process other than to expose potential problems to look back at, but they shouldn't be documented opinions. So you want to be really careful that if you make any decisions based upon what you've heard, that it's verified by some method and it's not strictly somebody's opinion or third-party information.
Good. And we'll talk about that a little bit more specifically in a moment or two. So Objective 5, tools you can use now. So again, we're eager to share this deck with whomever. wishes to have it, and it gives you some very specific framework and tools to use. So tool number one, red flags. Bob, red flags.
Red flags. I'm famous for red flags. So let me preface this statement with, in the governance work that we do on all elements of governance, what we're encouraging clubs to do is create process, document process, so that you can make sure that it's going to be handed down and it has some longevity, as opposed to things that are just discussed and committees are formed and their purpose and how they act and all the issues that typically go into a charter are documented. And that's the strength of the governance process. And the admissions committee should have a strong charter. The admissions committee should have a strong method by which they do their due diligence. And so we use this tool one as a red flag matrix just to really identify the levels of concern. And so you can have certainly candidates that breeze through the process without any concerns whatsoever. But more than likely, there's going to be questions asked, and we have this process by which you just tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, depending upon how serious they are, and what the process would be that you would follow. So this on the bottom, if you want to build your own, and so this we've put just that suggestion, knowing that if you don't have a clear process yet, there's a simple process, to go back and start building it, and you really need to start rebuilding it. So you need to go back and figure out what you've done already, start formulating the process, and of course you need governance people and admissions people and board involved in this, because you're really developing what those questions are going to be, how they're going to be formed, who's asking them, what the process with paperwork and the documentation and all that aspect. So and we recommend that the GM and council be a party to that, because they're the people that can really drive this thing. The attorney to keep it safe and fair, and the GM to see that it's practical, applicable, and also to be the person that over time has a continuity to see that it continues to be implemented. So our survey revealed that for clubs using background checks, only a quarter found no issues. And so we sort of pointed that out earlier, which suggests that there's a lot of issues that are out there. And so this red flag matrix is this, okay, so monitor, and we're really taking it through what are examples of things that you simply would monitor, and then what the committee action might be. So they're minor situations. These are the innuendos. These are incomplete applications and things like that. Social media that maybe has some red flags. They may not be important. They may not be showstoppers, but they are being brought up, and so you're going to look at it and you're going to keep them in mind. And committee action would tend to, if you don't find it to be offensive and against rules, then you're going to proceed and escalate it to the next level. And so there are those items, though, that really need to be clarified. This is where you start getting into some serious situations where reputation is in question, for example, as it says, and references are not too good, or they're indirect, or they're not responsive. And so, what might be going on there? And so the committee clearly wants to go back at those particular situations, delve deeper, give an opportunity for either the sponsor and or the candidate themselves to clarify things that otherwise just leave sort of a red flag. So the committee action would do that. You're going to stop a little bit on this. You're not going to move them forward until you really had an opportunity to investigate and clarify what the issues are. And then again, if it's a showstopper, then you're going to move them out or back. Or that you're going to escalate them to the board if, in fact, you're satisfied with the answers. And so then the escalate is, some of the really serious ones. So these are criminal convictions and indictments and civil litigation, prior club terminations, or prior club issues like we talked about. We do the manager to manager kind of discussions and find out that they're really hard on the staff, or they're unpleasant, or they misbehave, or they're just basically a bad member, or perhaps their spouse is, or their family is. And so that kind of information really is a serious situation that then the committee is going to take into consideration seriously and decide whether it would be forwarded or not. So on the next page, this tool of the decision tree is basically a simplified version, right, of how all these processes are taken. And so to have a document such as this out front, it helps to clarify and to visualize, how to proceed, when to send something back, when to de-escalate, when to actually just eliminate a candidate. So I don't think it warrants going through detail on this, Dan, unless you saw something in there.
I would just say that some clubs elect to share this with the sponsor, and others might share kind of a little more cryptic one, but by and large, it's part of the process that needs to get everyone be held accountable to. So documentation template, right? So here are some things, again, not trying to manage, I'm trying to manage time here, but what belongs in the file, what does not belong in the file, that anecdotal stuff that Bob was referring to, and who owns this and for how long. Boy, I bet many clubs, if not most clubs, struggle with where do you store this stuff, right? If some application, we're using the word application, or maybe that's not the right word these days. It could be profile, candidate profile. Where do you store the ones that haven't gotten any traction? And that's a pretty high legal standard, and you need to store it for 7 years. So again, not going to read through all this stuff, but the anecdotal stuff, the stuff in the middle, that's the stuff that you don't want to document explicitly. That's the stuff that gets you into the courtroom, and that's the stuff that it need not be overtly documented. So
let me just also say, that's an area in particular where you want to get legal counsel to give you advice on it, because we might have all different opinions on it, but the attorney that represents your state, and knows what the state laws is going to be your best counsel on that. And it also puts some strength behind it for the committee to understand that this is something that's been legally handed down.
Ideally, that attorney, at least in my experience, is not the local member who handles real estate closings. It's ideally, we can name, half a dozen legal firms in our industry, great. But there's other ones that we've encountered that have really excellent corporate governance experience, and their corporate governance experience is even at a higher and more sophisticated standard. So lots of times they're terrific at giving you legal advice, but an attorney's not an attorney all the time. So documentation example in terms of internal, again, 7 years is a standard retention act on this stuff. Internal only, committee chair, GM, locked up as if they were employee files. But this is not an application or a suggestion for membership. This is, or not the invitation for membership. This is an internal example of the stuff that you need to be collecting. You should make this document your own. I love when it's electronic, to Matthew's point, but this is kind of an overview of, at the minimum, what should be retained. Behavioral interview prompts. And some of these questions, it's when we were reviewing this, I'm having flashbacks to structuring interview guides for committees. And it's the power of the open-ended question, right? These are not binary questions, yes or no. They are open-ended questions. Whomever's doing the interviews has to be a good listener. I'm not going to tell you to use OWL or any of the other AIs right now to document these discussions and then synthesize it, but for some it might be a good idea. But these kinds of questions go to either community conduct, community involvement, a huge indicator, right? If a candidate's very involved with other not-for-profits and is a community giver, not just on a financial basis, that's a pretty good indicator of how they comport themselves in a not-for-profit environment. The reputation, of course, that goes to the tenure of how long somebody lives in a community. A town like Greenwich, not a lot of turnover, or as much apparently as Houston, but the process is still super slow. So it's an opportunity for people to get to know a family in a certain community. And then culture fit, whatever your culture is, we can define that over Cosmos sometime. That's how you should screen talent. But the overarching document is, of course, the bylaws. Before that, the certificate of incorporation, but also the legal standards that are in your state. And as I mentioned, there's 3, probably 10 states that are much more onerous in terms of these standards than others. But Bob, you're the bylaw expert. You have a couple of comments here.
Yeah, it's what we find with bylaws these days. We want to keep them somewhat flexible, vague, so that they have flexibility. But there's always the aspect of what kind of detail do you clearly want to have in there, so that it's going to be perpetuated, and that boards can't go rogue on your bylaws. And so here, it's just some statements of admissions review process. And so it's pretty encompassing. It's not overly detailed in terms of saying, exactly how the process is going to run, but it lets the membership know that there is a process. How is it operated? That there's a committee, in fact, that does most of the grunt work, and that everything is confidential. I think that that's really what's important these days. And some of the concern is about the confidentiality, both for the candidate and the sponsors themselves. And so it's important because in the end, we talked about when things go wrong, you get a bad member, and members look back at the board admissions and sort of say, well, how did this happen? And sort of say, well, we don't really have a process, and it's very secretive, and we can't really explain it to you. That's just not an answer, and it's not an answer for you. And if this gets out to the public, it's the same situation. You want to be able to stand up and be able to sort of say, boy, we do this right, and we have the process set in place, and it's transparent, and it's not a hidden thing, but we do value confidentiality, and we'll protect the club and the members and candidates. So,
all right. So, and we're going to give you a little bit of a roadmap here, a 30-day plan. And we're going to open it up to Q&A. Love for Matthew and Joe to jump in because they're on the ground, and Bob and I have been removed from being on the ground for a while, but 30-day plan. And again, this need not be 30 days. It sounded to me, Matthew took 17 years to refine that process, and it's ebbed and flowed and changed, I know, but it's, pressure tested. I keep using that phrase, but a good 30-day plan. Again, I'm not going to read all this, but you want to assess where you are, right? As we say in consulting, what's the state of things? How much of a process do you have in place? What's going well? Where are the bottlenecks? What are the best practices that you do use? What are the best practices that you should use? They're in here. Certainly call us if you have some questions about that, but you want to assess the current state of things and how it's working for you. Next, you want to build a process that fits your culture, your governance, your needs. Those 3 powerful questions I've mentioned a couple times before. The red flag matrix, you want to embed that. You want to document the process really well. You want to make sure that once you've got this process 80%, that you escalate it, you run it up the flagpole, and you say, does this make sense at the board level? And then can the board support it with and through the admissions committee, right? So you don't want the admissions committee necessarily to make this up. They don't have the fiduciary standard that board members do. They have more legal exposure at the board or executive committee level. So you want to shape it to where they can influence the result because they have to own it, but you don't want them to bake it. It'll take years if you let them, tinker with it, right? A lobster is a fish created by a committee. Write that down. So you want to pressure test your good work, and then you want to implement and refine. So once you get it in place, and again, we use a 4-week time frame. It could be 4 months, but you then want to put it in place and see what's working, get feedback, and then quietly own the integrity of the process. But obviously, most GMs, if not all, really don't influence who's getting in the club. But in this way, in this method, you can influence who gets in the club. So I think that's near our end. But in closing, I would argue that this admissions process is right up there with the highest function that your board can own. Other not-for-profit think tanks like Board Source or NCA would say their other highest function is the care and nurturing of their management team. I hope you agree. But shaping who's the future of the club by way of management, of course, and through the admissions process is mission critical. So that's.
Let me also make a point, and that is that with the turnover that we see these days in clubs, and is it averaging 8% or so? It had been, certain clubs are, but sometimes, at 8%, 5%, 6%, in the course of a decade, you can have a 50% turnover in your club. And so that's a short period of time. And so you are, through admissions, you're creating the future culture of the club. And so if you don't start with that, making sure that you have the right people, then it can certainly get out of hand. And in short order, you're going to have the island be run by the patient. I
would just point out, Bob, if you said it's 6% a year over 10 years, that's 60%, Bob.
Well, I had a big part there. It's 358.
All right, so Joe, we've been bloviating for quite some time. I'd really love to get the team involved. And if there's any questions out there, what did I say? John?
I think it's John.
Oh, sorry. But sorry, John. But I'd love to get Joe and Matthew engaged in terms of Q&A. And if there's any questions out there, we'd love to field them, of course.
Oh, there are questions. Let me assure you of that. There's quite a line of questions set up. So
wow.
I'm going to try to sectionalize them by topic. So here we go, gentlemen. Let's start with sponsors. So the first question is, wow, so many questions. Okay, let me find it. It's been moved all around here. Okay, so let's say, how do you handle it when you got a potentially great candidate with the wrong sponsor? How do you go about changing the sponsor? You really want this person in the club, but the guy's really not the best representative for them.
Matt do that.
Well, I was going to, absolutely. I think Matt, boy, you got, please jump in.
Well, Joe, it's up to you. If you've got a bad sponsor, that's your problem. We don't get involved like that. You're again, you got to set the examples. You start doing it for one, you're going to do it for another. I mean, if the sponsor is not great, then they'll figure it out themselves, I hope, and find another sponsor. But we're not going to say that for sure.
Yeah, not too dissimilar here either. We have 2 sponsors on every candidate, so that comment has come up more than once in the membership committee where they've got a bad sponsor, someone that maybe doesn't know what they're doing or how to handle it, which is one of the reasons why we have a sponsor orientation, to tell them what the expectations are. So that helps with that, but it doesn't eliminate it. And I was just going to add a couple other quick comments based on the presentation. On the questioning, we had this actually came up in one of our membership committee meetings about a month ago or so, where the candidate was meeting with a board member prior to a proposal coming in. And the question was, is there anyone at the club that you might have an issue with or might have an issue with you? And it was a very revealing answer, and basically put the brakes on the sponsors sponsoring that candidate. They probably would have been wasting their time. And then not at this club, but at another, when you're talking about sponsors and candidates, if the candidate that you sponsored gets into the club and there's a future disciplinary issue and they're called in front of the disciplinary committee, the sponsors that brought them in must attend with the candidate. So that really makes you, I would think, as a sponsor, strongly think through who you're sponsoring as a candidate for your club.
Yeah. I love that question, Joe. That was a really, really good one. Will you have an issue, or does somebody have an issue with you in this process, that's a really awesome one. I was in a situation in my prior life as a club manager where the sponsor was asked to just be a seconder. And the admissions chairperson said, "It's clear, Mr. Sponsor, you're not going to have the time to shepherd this through the process." and it diminished his role to just writing a letter. And it was the right thing to do for this particular candidate who was a solid person. So
what else you got, John?
So this goes out to Bob and Dan. Are there clubs where you don't have a sponsor situation? Have you seen that model?
boy, yes, and that occurs more than you might think. The clubs that come to mind are clubs that are developer clubs out west predominantly. They might be shepherded through the process through a membership director, but the membership director in the clubs that I'm thinking of right now, where the initiation fees are crazy high, they put a lot of this process in. They embed a lot of this process, referencing background checks, socializing them with key members, but it's facilitated with and through staff on the committee. And it could be a tenured general manager in that environment. It gets a little tricky when you're selling real estate in some of these environments, particularly in Florida, but that I've seen it occur is the short answer. Yep.
Good, thank you. Another anonymous attendee asks, do you have a sample sponsor questionnaire? Is there such a document rolling around out there?
That's a really, geez. Let me run to my office. No, I mean, I don't know if maybe we do. I mean, I'm happy to do some research for Mr. Anonymous or Ms. Anonymous.
Very good.
Right,
Well,
but,
Mr. or Ms. Anonymous, if you want to reach out to me at good@nationalclub.org, I'll pass that information forward. Or gentlemen, if you'd like to advance your slide to the QR code at the end,
yes.
Folks can get your contact information there and can contact you directly.
Okay.
Hey, John, real quick, we used to use a sponsor questionnaire, but felt it was a little bit too generic. So we feel that the letters of recommendation, you can tell a good one from a bad one. The one that, yeah, I've known them for a while, or I've traveled with them extensively or dined in their homes. Those are the things we're looking at when we're looking at sponsor letters. Questionnaires, I mean, they're going to probably check the boxes they need to check.
Sure.
We have questionnaires, love them.
Very good. All right, moving on from
strike your name and
sponsors.
send us one.
Moving on from sponsors, Jeffrey asks, have you experienced challenges or solutions you can share with beginning background checks for the first time and grandfathering in current members' convictions and or similar issues?
Grandfathering, you're convicted, but you can stay.
You're convicted.
Yeah, you have been through the process from we started it. You wouldn't.
We started ours and we went deeper into it, and I think you send a letter out. You just make sure people understand that the membership process is changing, but you can't go back. We obviously initiated a stricter process with the background checks, and we just sent a letter out to the membership, and actually we got accolades and letters and emails from the members saying this is fantastic, glad that you're tightening the gates.
Yeah, I would agree. We implemented ours probably 2 decades ago, and it was for all future candidates. We didn't go backwards. I would add that if you have a member that is perhaps convicted of a felony, whether you backgrounded them before or after, that's a decision for your board and your culture. And is that conduct unbecoming or not fitting with, the culture and standards of your club? Thankfully, that doesn't happen here very often, but it has happened in the past. And those members were removed from the club.
Well, all right.
Very good. Along a similar line, another anonymous attendee. We have a lot of those people from the anonymous club here. From a governance and risk management perspective, how would you recommend establishing a clear and consistent policy for vetting applicants who may have expunged criminal records, particularly in cases involving significant financial misconduct, for instance, six-figure misconduct? Specifically, what is the appropriate and legal sound way to address such situations while maintaining fairness, protecting the club's interest, and if necessary, declining the application in a respectful and defensible manner?
There were 4 questions there. And
There were, but it was really well presented.
It was really well written.
Yeah.
If he used the word specific twice, I'm like, oh, shit, how are we going to come up with specificity?
So I think it was interesting because that's an issue these days. Yeah, I think in Massachusetts, for one, it's like 7 years or so, and certain of this information is no longer available. And so I think that question is a legal question.
Yeah.
I would ask your real estate attorney.
real estate. Yeah, I feel not, deflecting here, but it feels like it's a legal standard. If it's expunged, what's that mean? I mean, you can't find it, I guess, but
So
proof,
Well,
I
what you
guess.
can do is you can actually ask if you've ever had an issue in your past. And if they say no and they're lying, then, there you go. They said they didn't, but they did. So you lied on the application, as we say in Southern California, adios.
I would also add that if you're posting candidates' names on your bulletin board or wherever at your club, in our case, we leave them up there from the time they come in as a proposal to election if they're extended an invitation or until their proposal is withdrawn. Over a 3-year period, if someone's aware of that situation, it's going to come up and be brought to the attention of the committee. So that's just another method to get additional information.
So Matthew, let me push back. It's a level of materiality, right? Like, I got a D in statistics in college. Do I disclose that? Or, hey, 10 years ago, something really bad was expunged, but it was a long time ago. I mean, how do you get to a standard of disclosure? It's an interesting debate.
A simple question, Dan. If they lie on the application, they're it's not worth it. Again, we don't have a medieval process here where we try to keep it as simple as possible. And if we find out, as Joe said, through a member or through another method that they did have some sort of criminality or a record, then, and then they put down on the application they didn't, they're lying to you.
Right. Do you ask that question on the application?
100%.
Hey, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Have you ever been convicted of a felony?
Have you have something expunged? We just say, have you ever had?
Yeah. Okay, good. That's
makes sense.
That makes sense. Thank you.
I hope anonymous, that answered the question.
Well, if not, I would remind folks that there are attorneys actually on this call. I see a couple in the participant list right now, and
Excellent.
perhaps you could reach out to an attorney to ask that question. You can find those people at the NCA website under our membership directory. You can sort by legal field and all kinds of good stuff. So please use those resources. Okay, let's see. How would you recommend clarifying a concern with the sponsors while keeping the source and incidents anonymous to protect the member who submitted it?
Gentlemen, that's a real live question for you, either of you, I would think.
Matthew?
Well, we tell the sponsor, one part of, I guess, Joe, you would say your guidelines, and our guidelines also go to how the membership committee behaves, but also how the chair behaves. The chair, and the sponsor knows that something may come up, and if they're asked to withdraw the application, they withdraw the application. We say, come back in a year, or you can try and go through the process, and you could be denied, in which case you cannot ever apply again to the club.
Yeah, we have the same outcome in the end. If you're denied, we don't take too many people to vote at the board and have a candidate denied. We will often communicate to sponsors level of support, as in your candidate has a good level, a significant level, or no support. No support can be an indication of an issue. And in those situations where there's a real issue, we'll just simply say, look, the odds of your candidate getting in are 0. Eventually the message will get across. We don't divulge specifics of any complaints or negative letters that may be received. It's very general, but we put the point across.
Very good. All right. As a follow-up to that, another member of the Anonymous Club asks, while private clubs often have discretion in their membership decisions, what are the best practices and legal considerations when a board wishes to deny an applicant without providing a reason? Didn't you just mention this, Joe? How can a club balance its autonomy with the need to mitigate potential legal risk and ensure decisions are fair, consistent, and well documented?
Call a lawyer first.
Call a lawyer.
If your board's going to start taking over the membership process and they're not part of it, you're in trouble. I think Dan mentioned this in his reports. That's what gets you into trouble. It's the membership committee's decision on whether someone doesn't, and the committee only takes the recommendation of our membership committee. So yeah, I mean, if they're doing that, get a lawyer just to make sure they tell them, hey, if you start doing this, you're putting your whole membership process at risk.
Mm.
My experience with client clubs is it shouldn't ever get to the board level. When you pass the box metaphorically or in fact, it's really bad when the board rejects somebody, right? It should get handled at the admissions level so it doesn't become, so I heightened the potential issue. But
then it can be, though. We've had it. And the one thing that we say in that case is if the board denies you, then you can't reapply. So that's the one out you have. And especially if it's a tricky situation where you could have potential litigation, unless, of course, your DNO covers your membership committee as well. So yes, it does. But what happens is that there's a recommendation to deny by membership, and then the board will deny the candidate.
Got it.
We typically never move a candidate out of membership without unanimous support of the membership committee. Voting someone down at a board meeting is a very public act, which we will avoid at all costs. As one of my past presidents used to say, we're not the library. Not everybody gets a card. So not everyone is invited to join. It's kind of it's a good point. Not everyone is invited to join. Every proposal that we have not all of them make it. Some are just going to linger, and some will be withdrawn for various reasons. So taking someone up and voting them down to me is an act we would try to avoid at all cost.
Right. Good point.
All right, here's a couple of just quickies, easy ones for you. Because I'll let you guys take a breather here for a minute. Daniel asks, sorry if you answered this already, who pays for the background checks? Sponsor, prospective member, club?
Club does.
Club does.
Very
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
Some I've heard of some clubs that do charge it back to the candidate, if you can believe it.
We do.
There you go.
We have 200 applications a year. I don't need that on my bottom line.
Isn't that what initiation fees for?
No, Dan, come on. We don't charge like the clubs belong to exorbitant amounts. And I don't accept, so I need those fees to pay for capital improvements. Come on, Dan. Shoot.
I'm always educated by you, Matthew. I love you, man.
Just put another $1,000 on the initiation fees if they get in.
Is it a nominal fee? Is it pretty reasonable, or is it exorbitant?
The survey said, no pun intended, the survey, when I was reviewing the data, between 50, which is, a throwaway one, but generally $200 to $1,000.
Right. Yeah.
Ours are a little more than that. They said they're slightly more thorough as well.
Well, it's good to have someone else paying for it.
Yeah.
Love that. Shows commitment, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anne asks, does the public post happen nearer to the beginning or the end of the candidate vetting process?
Well, our candidates are posted from the time the proposal comes in. If you're talking about at time of election, we post candidates that the board, we vote 1 month and elect the next. So we actually post this person has been recommended to the board for membership, and the board is supporting that. And then the next month, the board will vote that person in. So they're up the entire time, but the quote unquote posting of a proposed candidate happens the month before. But by then, hopefully they've been completely vetted.
Yeah, that's the same as us.
Longer they have visibility, the members have visibility into their prospective candidacy, the better. Seems to be the best practice.
Yeah, we put their pictures on milk cartons. That seems to work well.
Speaking of best practices, Joseph asks, on background checks, what are some of the best practices that you look for? Issues I have run into is, what's the reason for flagging? And is that announced to the prospective member?
The one I've been fascinated with mostly, everyone, is the civil suit. Apparently, many wealthy people like to solve neighborhood problems with just suing their neighbors. And I was fascinated when I see this come through at other clubs. The credit check is perfunctory these days and all, but that element seems to be more material than I ever would have imagined.
I think also it's interesting enough is that DWIs and DUIs and multiples is something that comes up, doesn't seem to be very significant, except for when you find out that somebody has that problem and potentially has a drinking problem. And so how do you handle that? I think that's a real question that a club needs to think about pretty seriously.
John, not that you need more fun, but as you know, that's my job here. But as I mentioned when we were getting ready for this, we also perform the background checks on our board members before they come onto the board. Again, we're a large business. It impacts about 10,000 people. So we just want to make sure, again, if somebody comes afterwards, that the people that are voting on some major decisions that are representing our club that have insurance coverage, we do everything just to be safe. I mean, like I said, litigation is such a big piece of California now. And the board members don't mind. I mean, if they do, hurry up and do a background check.
Yeah, well said.
Dig deeper.
Well said. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, we're gone into overtime here. So folks, if you need to break away, we understand. Panelists, I hope you guys can hang on a little bit longer. I've got some more questions here in the queue. Everybody good?
Bring it on.
All right, here we go.
John, I have to jump. I apologize profusely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Totally understandable, Matthew. Thank you so much for joining us.
We appreciate your input.
Thank you. Joe, you look remarkable, and thank you for sending me my orange tie to wear today. I just don't make the money you do, so it's wonderful. Thank you. God bless you.
Glad we matched up.
All right, gentlemen. For those of you who remain, we happy few. All right. Dan asks, we're a 501c7, but membership is included in the home site purchase. We've decided to separate privileges from the equity membership during prospective buyers of the home site to complete background and credit during the due diligence period of the contract. Our bylaws allow for the board to determine privileges, and legal's given the okay for this, but what do you guys think? Are there any pitfalls in this process?
Boy.
Yeah.
All right.
That's above my pay grade.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you guys are in the wrong profession. Yeah.
As long as you're asking a good lawyer, I think you'll be fine. I mean, it's hard to. What are the criteria for determining privileges?
Yeah.
And go back to legal. Ask them that question. We don't have an answer for you today.
I'm flattered they think we would know.
Yeah. In Florida, we do know Florida's got some tough rules and very specific rules.
All right, here's an easier one for you. I don't want you guys to get gun shy or anything, but here we go. What's involved in the sponsor orientation, and when do you do these? At what point in the membership do you do this?
Sure. So we do our sponsor orientation when they're coming in to talk about sponsoring a candidate. So before we hand out the form, the sponsorship form, that is when our membership director runs through that with them. We've done them in a group setting, and we've done them one-on-one. Again, just to explain the expectations. If someone just thinks they're going to send in a proposal, here's my candidate, and when do they get in, then we want to make sure they understand the time commitment that it's going to take to get their candidate through the process.
And the membership director, Joe, is a paid employee on your team?
That is correct.
Good. Okay. Question of clarification there.
Yeah. Okay. I would suspect that that's much more structured than most clubs in terms of having sponsored orientations per se. That the process is probably explained by the admissions director at the time and say, okay, this is what you need to do, and take them through it that way rather than having something quite formal. But they would typically say, here's the process and the letters and the time expectations and who you got to meet, and all those issues would be standard form, I would think, for a membership director or a general manager that takes that that role.
Good.
Yeah, we also provide them with all that information in writing too, so they can go back and reference it later.
You have a YouTube for it too?
No.
Do they sign a statement of attestation that they've received the materials, Joe?
They do not, but they're required to sign the proposal. So
of course,
both sponsors must sign off on the proposal form.
Yeah. Okay.
As well as the candidates.
Good. Folks, just before we go into the next round of questions here, I just wanted to tell everybody that the presentation slides are over in the chat. If you want to download those, there was a lot of really good content in the written slides that may have been glazed over quickly. So grab those, and it'll make a great refresher for this. And as a reminder, we'll be sending out a recording of this webcast probably tomorrow around the same time. Look for that to come into your inboxes at home. Okay, Anonymous says, gentlemen, from a records management and compliance standpoint, is it acceptable to scan and digitally retain membership files and securely dispose of the original paper documents? Are there any best practices or legal considerations we should be aware of to ensure proper retention, security, and compliance?
My understanding that digitizing the documents is preferred and easier to store as long as they're secured. That, and again, I'm not the attorney in the room.
If you're going to get signatures, use DocuSign or some formal process like that, so that you can verify that it's truly an original.
Good. All right. By the way, half of the questions we're getting are like your biggest fans. Everyone is so happy that you've presented this material. They think it's just a wonderful thing, and everyone's
Really?
very grateful. There's a lot of love coming in over the chat right now.
Great. Thank you.
Andy
operators are standing by.
Yeah, there'll be a QR code at the end. You can just send your donations in directly to Denehy.
Or just hire us.
This one I think is sort of back-ended. This is once the member's in. A new member, Andy asks us, a new member sends a note about a capital improvement to a board member he doesn't know. Is this considered poor form or behavior by the member? And should the member's sponsor be informed of such note? And should the member be contacted by the club's GM about the poor form of the note?
The content of the note is what's in question, or just writing it?
I think it might be the way it was addressed to someone they didn't know, and perhaps it was strongly worded.
And the person is in, John?
The person's already in, so I think they're asking, do you go back to the sponsor and say, hey, your boy's not playing right?
Well, I'm going to go, it feels like it's a culture question, right? And in some clubs, probably Matthew, certainly that relationship is owned for a while by the sponsor. It might be poor form, and maybe tenured general managers just pick up the phone and go, "Hey, dude, what this is how it goes down at the Yabba Dabba Doo Club." But it feels like it's a situational question, but it goes to the character of this new member that could be quite challenging over the long term.
And I think that those clubs that do have the provisional membership period, that you should have a method by which, if people have a complaint or a problem with that particular member, that it gets escalated, whether that would be admissions or whether it go directly to somebody in the board or executive committee, depending how you would set that process up. Do you, Joe? Do you have a process by which if
we do. If it's the content of the letters is, I'll say, out of keeping with what the standards are of the club, and if it's a first offense, they would meet with the disciplinary committee chairman and myself, and we'd have a conversation about it, of what the expectations are. Writing a letter, fine. If the content of the letter is again not in keeping with the standard or expectations of the club, then we'd have that conversation, document that, and not expect to meet again.
It feels like once the baby's born, the admissions committee's responsibilities have ceased, right? It then becomes escalated to a management issue or a board issue.
Whatever your grievance process is.
Yeah.
So once he's in, it's not really the sponsor's responsibility to keep him policed.
Well, that's a by and large statement.
Yeah. But it was interesting, I think Joe mentioned before, that if one of these members gets themselves into problems, that they'll drag the sponsor into the hearing. So you do keep that connection, and it does reinforce that the importance of the sponsorship. So I think that I don't know what purpose they would serve at the committee other than to sit there as moral support or be appalled,
or say, "Hey, dude, this is crazy. Why are you comporting yourself that way?" So.
Yeah, I think on the bringing the original sponsors back in, again, that's not here at River Oaks Country Club. It's at another club.
Okay.
However, it goes to thinking about who you're sponsoring to be a member of the club, so
Right.
that your responsibilities continue.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. And then the last question. The last question is,
Wow.
would any of you be willing to share with the name of background check companies you have used in the past? And I think specifically they're looking for the ones that you use to scan social media. Let me just say again, there are a number of vendors who are members of the National Club Association that you'll find in the membership directory on our website. And there are a couple of vetting companies on there who do background checks. But I think this person's specifically asking, where do you look? What do you use to scan social media?
I am absolutely happy to share that with you. I just don't know what our administrative assistant, Pam, who's not in the room, have that person email me or email you.
Okay,
and
great.
I'm happy to share. And we've used a couple over time that we're agnostic about. We're trying to use the best one we can.
And
as a
people in
reminder,
the
everyone, if
survey
you want to do
provide this.
follow-up questions to Dan or to Bob James, their
Yeah.
information is there in the slide. Actually, it's probably
Great.
on it. But
Great.
yeah.
Or to
So that's
Joe.
it, gentlemen. Thank you so much for the extra 15 minutes.
You bet.
Folks at home, thank you for joining us. This has been a great and very informative webcast. Gentlemen, Bob, Dan, Joe,
Thank you, John. Thank you,
Matthew,
Joe.
all of you, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks for
Thank
attending.
everybody attending.
Have a good
Thanks
afternoon,
so much.
everyone. This
Cheers.
concludes today's webcast.
Thank you.